My guest today at Beverley FM is local author John Brien, who's just published a very interesting book about our local accent. The book's entitled "Me Sannies a Brannies." I've never heard that expression before, and I've lived here all my life. Help me with it, John.
Right. I came to live in this part of the world when I was 15 years old. I went to Hessel High School, and that was the first thing I ever heard spoken in a local dialect, because a girl in my class had got some new shoes for PE, and all the rest of the class knew exactly what she meant, and I hadn't got a clue.
In other words, my sand shoes. Yeah.
My plimsolls.
Well, plimsolls to you, sand shoes for the rest of us.
Exactly, and that's where it started.
So Hull being the end of the line, as it says on the cover of your book, the end of the motorway, and the end of a lot of things really, even though it's just won its City of Culture award. This book is about local accents. How long has it taken you to write it?
On and off about 5 years. It's something that's been bubbling away in the background for a long, long time, but then about 5 years ago, changing circumstances meant I had the opportunity to actually do the research. It's just something that I loved. I heard it that first time, the first few months of living up here. I just grew to love the dialect, and before too long I realised that it is a very, very local thing. I picture it as being a semicircle with a radius of about 10 or 12 miles, starting about the pier in Hull. So it comes up to Beverley, it goes out to about Brough, goes out to about Heddon the other way. Not exactly, but roughly that kind of thing. And it is just very, very special, and I find it fascinating, and it's just stayed with me for the rest of my life.
When you're beginning to research a book on accents, where do you start?
Probably two parallel things. One is talking to people. It was quite noticeable when my children, who are now in their late 20s, early 30s, but when they were little, they would noticeably have a bath with me and a bath with the mum. Or we would go on a bus or a castle and a castle, wherever. So it was talking to people, firstly the family. Some members of the family mercilessly took the mick out of me whilst we were holding conversations. So partly it was talking to people, then people who got to know I was interested. As I got further into writing it, people would send me things. You see on the table there, somebody sent us a book, Yorkshire Dialect Classics. People send things because they know you're interested, or we get them for presents and things. The other thing, of course, is the internet. Possibly a third thing that I'll come on to later was reading books of other dialects. And one of the things I realised is that there's a lot of things that are in our local dialect which people think are unique to here and actually aren't. But because they're used so much, they do constitute part of the accent, and part of the dialect.
You mentioned to me when we were talking that somebody you were talking to recently, who comes from Lincolnshire, had heard themselves and their family saying something which was basically a colloquialism in Hull. How did that get to Lincolnshire? Or did it come from there in the first place?
Well, in some cases it's the fact that people now, over the last 20 or 30 years, are a lot more mobile than they ever were. All dialects, I think, are caused by the movement of people. And if you go back far enough, what I can find is that the dialect around here owes as much to the Vikings as anybody else. Some of the vowel sounds and some of the actual words and place names go back to Scandinavia in about 1,000 years ago or more. But I think possibly, going back to the thing about people moving, there's a lot of people live in Barton-on-Humber and the villages along there who used to live in Hull, and they've taken the accent and the dialect and the expressions, turns of phrase with them. Other things, perhaps it's a word that has evolved over the years, and I kind of think it's a bit like Darwin's theory that you might get the same object or the same thing has 2 or 3 different words used in. It's the one that the most people use that survives. So it's kind of survival of the fittest in the same way.
Our guest today is John Brien. We're talking about that local accent that makes us all jar when we hear it either in the media or when we hear it in the street. And we'll be back talking with John after this.